I wonder if you can, think back to a year ago as you were finishing this film. I also remember when we were showing that clip, there was a certain amount of anxiety, if that's the right word, about starting to publicize this film because there's a lot of sensitivity around it. So I wonder if you can describe, as you were finishing this film in the lead up to its premiere at the Sundance Film Festival this past January, what you were thinking about its putting out in the world.
Terrified. It was, and at that period, it was like pure chaos because we were, as everyone I think is with their films, once they, get a sense that they're going to get into Sundance, you're just in this mad race to try to fix everything. And we had this horrifying audio problem at the very end of the process where we realized that our audio track needed to be entirely re-recorded, the narration. And it was like the film was due, I think, in a week. We had to hand it in, so we had to scramble and fly out to Skywalker to work with Chris Barnett, who did the sound for it, and we completely re-recorded it like days before we were supposed to hand in the final thing. What we were, most concerned about was that we had to go to great lengths to. There's a guy in the film who could possibly be indicted or arrested for talking to us. And we were scrambling to try to figure out how to ensure that even if someone had a copy of the film, that they couldn't scrub his identity or scrub the cover off of his identity. And one of the clips that played at that was of him, and it wasn't completely scrubbed. I mean, if someone had somehow taken it there, we were concerned that they would have been able to ascertain his identity. So that was a part of the anxiety there. But in general, I think we also were, when we first started making this film, we were just begging for money, basically, and we thought we were going to show it in like churches and garages or project it onto buildings in New York or in like union halls or something. We didn't really think it was going to make it into Sundance at all. And so it was, to go from there then to being at DOC NYC and showing clips of the film was sort of surreal for us. We're more like guerrilla journalists and used to having to put our own stuff out into the world without much of a platform. And so it was, we felt honored to be there and also sort of terrified at what that meant. The idea of being in the same place with Demi Moore doing whippets in a hot tub was a little strange too. So
the question was, are you afraid of doing the work you do?
I'm more afraid of getting audited, but well, look, I mean, I think it's not that I don't believe that there are people within U.S. society that are capable of killing journalists or trying to harm journalists. I take that seriously, but I look at a country like Mexico, where journalists are assassinated or murdered every week. There are more than a dozen journalists missing right now in Syria. 30 journalists have been killed in Somalia this year. And so when people ask me if I fear for my life, the first thing I feel is embarrassment, because there are many other journalists around the world who are taking very serious risks every day, most of whom are local journalists in a country where they don't have the option to come back to Park Slope, Brooklyn, the land of baby strollers and lattes of all varieties. And so I always feel a bit ashamed thinking about that. You have every right to ask, and I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying I feel a sense of shame even thinking that someone would ask me that question, because I know so many people who are incredibly brave. I do think journalism, there's a war against journalism right now. And in some societies, it comes in the form of assassinating journalists. And in our society right now, it comes in the form of doing mass surveillance on reporters and trying to go after our sources and prosecuting whistleblowers under the Espionage Act. And trying to force reporters to give up their sources under threat of imprisonment. Glenn Greenwald, who I'm working with, from The Guardian, who's been the primary reporter dealing with the revelations of NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, his life partner, David Miranda, was snatched in the airport in Heathrow and held for more than 10 hours, 9 of them without access to a lawyer. And all of his computer equipment was seized. So the risks in our society, I think, are more focused around government surveillance than they do direct threats to the lives of journalists, but that's certainly the case in a lot of countries. And whistleblowers take great risks to provide information to the public that, for various reasons, President Obama and his administration don't want in the public domain. They're addicted to secrecy. They overclassify, and anytime anything secret is revealed, they immediately deem it a threat to national security. And that's disturbing. I think it undermines the point of a free press in a democratic society.
I'm curious, with the revelations that have come out in the last year, thanks to whistleblower Edward Snowden, did any of those revelations surprised you, or are they merely affirmations of things that you had a strong hunch about from your other reporting?
I wouldn't say that they surprised me, you know, and it's not out of a sense of cynicism. I think it's, you know, there was very little in the WikiLeaks cables, these hundreds of thousands of cables that came out that I saw and I was like, holy shit, I can't believe that happened. I mean, I think we have a general sense that this is how the U.S. conducts its business abroad and at home. What I think is important about it is the details and the scope of it. I mean, you know, I have to be careful because I've had access to the documents and I've seen documents that have not yet been published. But what I'll say is that only a small fraction of the abuses by the U.S. government against its own population have been revealed. The extent of spying on Americans and collecting data on Americans is far greater than what we currently understand based on publicly available documents and reporting. I mean, basically, they are vacuuming up all of our data every day. And the theory is that they're never going to look at it unless someone is involved with an act of terrorism or something else. Or some criminal activity, but they're just, everything that we put online, they're taking. There's no such thing as deleting an email. You can't delete a photo. I always tell this to kids, like, you know, you think Snapchat erases that photo, well, you know, that photo's already been captured, it's already downloaded. And so, you know, no, I wasn't surprised, but one of the stories that I'm working on with Glenn right now deals with the role that the National Security Agency plays in the global targeted killing or assassination program. I didn't want to be in the film at all like this. You know, I actually fought up until, I mean, I almost vetoed it at the very end because I would be up at night tossing and turning about this. I don't write articles in the first person, and I didn't want to be in this role. I have a lot of trouble sitting through screenings of this for all sorts of reasons, one of which is that I'm just embarrassed to see myself on a screen like that. And you know, the only time I'm ever on any screen is when I've written a story and I get invited to go onto a show to talk about it. But and this is weird to me, where people can eat popcorn and watch. It's so strange. Rick Rowley, the director, he and I have been friends and colleagues for, I don't know, 12, 13 years. I worked with his wife for many years in Baghdad. She's also a filmmaker. And you know, we had done collaborative projects before, but never a film. And we'd always talked about doing something on a bigger scale. And so early on, when President Obama came into office, we decided that we wanted to look into sort of Obama's war in Afghanistan. He had pledged to, you know, escalate the war there, and he was surging troops. And we could see that he was putting in positions of authority to run the Afghanistan war people from the special ops community, who basically are hunter-killer teams, people like Stanley McChrystal. So initially, we weren't sure if it was going to be a movie. We went over there, maybe we were going to do a series of like short doc-style half-hour episodes about Afghanistan. And once we understood that there was this force that not only was hitting in Afghanistan but around the world, we decided to broaden the scope of it. And then Anthony Arnove, who's here, who's a producer of the film with me, and Brenda Coughlin helped us to actually envision how we could make it into a film. And we put together a very small team of people and started begging for money and applying for grants. And you know, but it was a very organic process, partly because it was a small team and we all had known each other for a long time. And Rick, you know, Rick and I are like brothers. I mean, even when we had the budget to get separate hotel rooms, we still a lot of times would sleep in the same room and on floors of rat-infested, you know, houses and other things. But yeah, I mean, Rick's a brilliant guy, you know, and he doesn't really have any formal training. And just to understand, Rick shot this film almost entirely by himself. At times, he would have to train someone in Afghanistan or somewhere else to use a secondary camera to film me while he was, you know, filming the primary interview. He also edited the film, like did the technical editing of it, sitting there at the computer with me and David Riker, who was the co-writer and co-editor of the film. And then he and his brother did the color correct at the end. So, I mean, these guys are incredibly sharp people, and they're like raw talent, you know. And I have a lot of admiration for Rick Rowley, the director of the film. As to the first question, Pakistan, I'm banned from Pakistan. And in fact, they gave Rick a visa and they wouldn't give me a visa. And Rick said he's not going to go without me. And I still can't get a visa to Pakistan. And I was banned not for something having to do with this film. It was for previous reporting that I did about Blackwater, the mercenary company, and its relationship with some very powerful retired Pakistani generals who were running a private security company, and I got basically on the blacklist in Pakistan and was then directly told by now former Pakistani ambassador to the U.S., Hussein Haqqani, that I wasn't going to ever be getting a visa to Pakistan. So I guess I can't vacation in Lahore anymore.